Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Art family.
Welcome back.
So, guys, there are so many different beliefs concerning the historical personage of the one known as Jesus, Yeshua, Yehoshua. There's so many different opinions on who exactly he is, and, what exactly did he teach? As we've said many times, what we have right now, well, I should even say previous to now, because there's been some major discoveries with the Dead Sea Scrolls and with the Nag Hammadi. So the illumination that we receive from some of these ancient texts have caused many to reassess exactly what were the teachings that were given by this teacher of righteousness.
And just like everything else that we've been taught growing up, now we find out that things are not as what we've been told or what we think.
And there's so much deception going on, cover-ups and deception. As we look at where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's a big question. Was Jesus, Yeshua, and Essene? That's a big question. Well, first off, how about his name? Because he wasn't called by anybody he knew Jesus. That's the bottom line. And in the time when he walked the earth, he wasn't known as Jesus. That comes from the Greek Jesus, which is then translated over into Jesus, in the English language given to us by the Latin or Roman Empire. So his name in Hebrew is Yehoshua, which over time became contracted to the shorter Yeshua. So basically the meaning is the Lord is salvation. But Jesus comes from Jesus, which is not a true translation. So, this is where, people will get so caught up in what they've been brought up with, but not even realize what the reality was. So his disciples weren't saying, Jesus, come have some bread and wine with us. No, Yehoshua.
Right. There's just so much information and so many stories have been passed down the line. One has to wonder, well, what is true? Was this a real person? And what were they doing all their life?
Yeah, it amazed me growing up because, there were those, and I grew up going to a Catholic church until I was 12. It was amazing because most of the people in the church thought that Jesus was actually Italian, Roman, and didn't realize that he came from this tiny little area over here, Judea. The Roman Empire, obviously, was one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen, and its dominance was supreme, and it ended up transforming into the Roman Catholic Church, which held power over the kings and queens, even 1,000 years after the time of Christ and far past that even.
So it was just so hectic. How do we know what translations to really uphold?
So an Essene is a member of a religious sect or brotherhood that flourished in Palestine from about the 2nd century BC to the end of the 1st century AD. The New Testament doesn't mention them, and accounts given by Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, and Pliny the Elder sometimes differ in significant details, perhaps indicating a diversity that perhaps existed amongst the Essenes themselves. And they were people that lived communally. And of course, the whole word communism stirs up a lot of hatred right now with everything going on with, China and a lockdown and everything. But, the root word is communal, and, things have been twisted as time has gone on. And again, people now don't even understand what the original meanings of things were. So, Karl Marx and Lenin, they were not the original communal living proponents. And China is not a country that has that system in place. As we have said, basically we're living in a technocracy that is fascist in origin. and that's really what we have. These people shared everything. They shared everything. Everything was basically community property. That's not what we have nowadays anywhere. Not at all. We have a rich aristocracy. We have still kings and queens, my lady and my lord. And we don't have everybody on an equal basis. Not at all. So again, there's so many things that are underway to twist and distort. And, just take, for instance, the goddess Isis, who was thought to be a benevolent being, worshipped by so many. And then, of course, we have the terrorist organization that gets named ISIS to give us a negative connotation and to just send that negative energy out over something that was worshipped and adored in a positive light.
Right, and this is something that they do commonly over and over and over again, and it slowly twists our belief systems or what we think we might believe.
Yeah, and again, everything has been hidden, twisted, distorted. But this is really something that's always interested me, so I've always been a student of the differences, especially in this time period. So what you had the Pharisees. This is at the time of Christ, which you can see their characteristics, law, interpretations of the Torah, basically middle class, believed in the resurrection of the dead, believed in an afterlife, and they were rejected by Jewish leaders. Sadducees, they were all about the temple life. The Torah alone is to be utilized and studied. Upper class, they didn't believe in resurrection. They didn't believe in afterlife. And they supported the Jewish leaders, And so I see parallels in some ways, with looking into India's caste system and the Brahmins, who were they controlled everything that was happening in the temples, and they exerted tremendous influence in society. And that was part of the Aryan invasion, which many dispute and don't think there really was an Aryan invasion at the same time. This is a world designed to be confusing, to say the least.
To say the absolute least.
So then we have the Zealots, Simon the Zealot. They were deeply religious Jews who believed that violent action was justified if it was in defense of the Jewish religion. The Zealots thought that if people had the courage to rebel against the Roman rule, God would send a Messiah, a Savior. They expected the Messiah to be a military leader who would rid Palestine of the Romans. As a result of this view, the Zealots were involved in attacking cities and towns where they killed Roman soldiers and also were wiped out in a horrendous slaughter. And when we get to 70 AD, it's just a nightmare that's occurring over there. And the Essenes, again, now they were communities of monks, but also they were thought to be mostly male, but it wasn't like there couldn't be any females as well. They believed that they were obeying the word of God by going out into the desert and escaping worldly concerns of Jerusalem and the corruption of the temple. So they didn't think you had to go to a temple. They thought the temple was within you. And that's the way you go to God. You go within. They rejected the Roman rule. They rejected the whole system. They basically tried to get away from the system. And interestingly enough, there's a lot of modern Essenes springing up now, Essene communities springing up now, that recognize we live in this beast system, and they want to get the bleep out of it.
Right. You can't blame them. And I really do have a very fond feeling toward the Essenes. I've never studied them, never read up on them, nothing, but they just feel so right.
Yeah, and I got the same thing. I always had the same thing. I always felt that Christ was in the scene. Some of their rites and rituals included baptism. And so again, it's interesting too, because they were looking for a teacher of righteousness to come, who was going to show them the way. And we have writings that are pre-BC, 200 years BC, some of the oldest ones that speak of this. They actually speak in a language that becomes very, very clear and obvious that they're talking about they're expecting the same being.
Right, they are. And it's, I just think they're beautiful beings. Period.
And Qumran is the only completely monastic site of the Essenes and is often used to give examples of Essene lifestyle. Though in some places the Essenes married, had children, and lived in part of a main city. Mostly it was communal lifestyle, prayers, work, study, and ritual daily. Bathings, baptism to wash away the sins, up to 3 years probation before you could be a member. Strict rules for excommunication, and they believed that they were literally fulfilling Bible prophecy. So they were hardcore. These people lived it. They really lived it. They didn't pay lip service, as we can see with the Sadducees and the Pharisees in so many ways. These people took it literally, completely, and they were very, very devout.
Yeah, they really suited up and they showed up for their beliefs.
So as we see here, originally a group of priests founded and or led by a teacher of righteousness during the early Maccabean Hasmonean era. They regarded the Jerusalem priests as illegitimate since they were not Zadokites from the family of the high priest of Zadok, and they rejected the validity of temple worship totally, entirely, and thus refused to attend the festivals or to support the Jerusalem temple. And we know how money works. Tithing 10% and et cetera, the riches of the Vatican.
Oh, it's all so unfair.
So they weren't going to have any of that. And so with the Dead Sea Scrolls, we discovered some of their writings. Now, just to get into how people distort things, and this one right here, this article is out of EEARTS. After the Dead Sea forgeries exposed, how do we know the scrolls in Israel are authentic? How do we know anything is authentic? At the same time, go within. That's what you have to do, is to go within. But the scroll fragments that were at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. turn out to be fakes. So now, because of that, all of them are thought to be fake by people that just read one article without looking deeper. And so you'll get people, and I've done videos on the Essenes maybe about 3 or 4 times, and they'll be like, oh, Dead Sea Scrolls are all fakes. Well, no, the ones in Washington are fakes. The ones that we see over in Israel were carbon dated and shown to come from between 2,000 and 2,200 years ago. And, this is by some experts, including expert over at Johns Hopkins University, but many others too. So no, they're not necessarily all fakes. Some were, but those were the ones in a totally different location and much fewer in numbers. See, this is how things get so distorted. And there is tremendous deception going on right now. Tremendous. And we have sources that are giving us some truths, but they're going to twist it. And I've been telling you guys about that. We see this coming. Now that we're going to be getting disclosure coming out, there's disclosure with a purpose. And the bottom line is, the purpose is they're going to try to convince you that the good guys are the bad guys and the bad guys are the good guys.
Yes, and that's what they've done all along, and they're actually very good at it. Look at what they've taught us through all the different religions. I don't really believe that they're really trustworthy.
So, be very aware of that and develop discernment. Go within. And don't just learn things left-brained. Develop your intuition. And it takes work, but, it's worth it. Our abilities are increasing. We could see through the lies. Like with Cindy and I, we both can see energy. So we could glean just by looking at a person's photo what's going on. We can see it clear as day. We've been able to spot. It's easy for us to see when somebody's got an attachment, or if it's a draconian attachment overlay. We could see it. We know it. We feel it. We sense it. But we also spend hours working on ourselves spiritually every single day to develop that discernment.
You definitely getting in touch with your heart chakra, being in touch with yourself and who you are and what you're about. So when you start working on someone else and their energies start to enter your energy field, what is you and what is not.
Yeah, and so the Essenes had a little bit more of a mystical view of things, and they utilize the tree of life concept as well. These different realms, these different emanations, different lokas is what we would call them if we're using the Hindu system. And we could see where there's a congruency again.
Right, another one.
Whereas when we're looking at things from, say, a very, very fundamentalist point of view, there's no congruency with other systems. And again, if you study all the works of pretty much anybody you could find, any group of people around the globe, when it comes to indigenous beliefs, and we see how they will tend to go along with a shamanistic point of view of reality, that there are different worlds, different densities, different dimensions, different spiritual beings. Spiritual is just basically it's a different density. It's a higher vibe. That's really all we're talking about. It all stems down to, like Tesla saying, it's just all energy. It's all mind stuff. It's all just separations by frequency and vibration.
Right. It can be very simple, or it can be very complicated.
So, according to Essene cosmology, both heaven and hell are very real. However, the understanding of the nature of heaven and hell is quite different than the Orthodox Christian doctrine that most people are familiar with. In the ancient Essene Holy Scriptures, Yehoshua teaches the following points about heaven and hell. There's not only one heaven and one hell, rather there are countless heavenly realms and countless hellish realms. Yehoshua, Jesus said, in God's house there are many mansions in various realms. He describes higher heavens and lower heavens. He describes higher hells and lower hells. According to Jesus, the universe is a vast cosmic school system for the training and evolution of souls. There are various levels of this cosmic school system, and each level consists of many planets, spheres, and realms inhabited by sentient beings. Some of those realms are very violent, hateful, dark, and miserable, and would thus be definitely hellish. Some are peaceful, joyful, light, and love-filled, and definitely they can be called heavenly. So, this goes along perfectly with what we discover when we go deep into the Kabbalah, deep into Hermeticism, deep into Taoism, deep into the Hindu belief system, and when we read what the Buddhist monks have discovered just looking through the astral plane, doing their meditations, this is exactly what they see. And as we know, the lower fourth density is a hellish realm, which is inhabited by dark entities such as the ones that are infecting and controlling the minds of those in control of this planet.
And when you read this information, just you feel it, feel your cells, feel your body. Does it resonate? And this just feels so right to me.
So while in reality, everything is just an infinite number of different shades of gray, you still have a tendency towards light or a tendency towards the darkness. And, again, that evolves and revolves around, the ultimate feeling of love and compassion that drives one to try to help others as much as they can. And, when you look at the teachings of Christ, they're just so obvious, So we have the version that we have was given to us in 325 AD, starting in 325 AD by the Council of Nicaea, which was called for by the Holy Roman Emperor Constantine. And again, this is somebody that put people to death, was conquering the world, killed his own wife and child in order to maintain power, and said that he saw a vision. He saw a vision in the sky of a bright cross, and it said, "Conquer in this image." And again, can you imagine Christ ever saying that? No, it goes so against all the teachings, so against it. And then when we see the power structure that comes out of it, the money, the control, the ego, the greed, it's pretty obvious. So every book that did not go along with what he wanted to portray, him and his, controlling elite, was destroyed, burned. And then eventually people too that wouldn't go along with the official belief system became heretics and were put to death. And thus, the Gnostics and many other groups were wiped out, really wiped out. And we just found some of these documents that have been lost for 1900 years, recently in the 20th century. So then we get a different view of things. Like Christ said, the kingdom of heaven, why you're looking for it here and there. It's within you. It's inside of you. And so, again, that's talking about the spirit of source, which lies within all of us. And he also said, you shouldn't marvel at the things I do because you're going to do greater. So if he was the only one that could do the things that he did, how could we do anything greater? Again, that's another thing that just doesn't make sense when you look at, this belief system that's been given to us, which, in my opinion, is not the original set of teachings. It's been distorted, twisted, edited. As I've shared before, with the most complete version of the Gospel of John that we have, which is somewhere between 2 and 300 AD, there's over 3,000 edits in it. 3,000 edits. What are they editing? What are they trying to scribble out? They would use jots and tittles, so to speak, in Hebrew, because they didn't put the vowels in. And so again, it's just like a code. What can you could change the code, if we think about Morse code, if we think about binary code, there's a big difference if you add 1 1 or add 1 0.
Right. So, it's such a controlling mechanism, and they adjust it to their needs as time passes on. And they don't, they do mention about all these edits, but how many people really sit and ponder that? What were these edits? What did they mean? How did they change things?
So, I thought this was interesting because it says, but whatever their origin, it is certain that the Essenes existed for a very long time as a brotherhood, perhaps under other names in other lands. The teaching appears in the Zend Avesta of Zoroaster. And really, when we look to Persia, we see an awful lot of very synchronous thought between this time period in Judea and Palestine and what the Persian philosophies were teaching as well. Very, very similar. It's so easy to see. But then also we had the Jewish exiles. So they were exposed to that culture. And then the wise men from the East. The wise men come from the East bearing gifts. Why? Because they know. Because they know. They're magi. They're magicians. Mm-hmm. They're people with the inner understanding of things. They understand things beyond the obvious. And the inner workings of things. And it's interesting, too, because it contains the fundamental concepts of Brahmanism, the Vedas, the Upanishads, the yoga systems of India. All this, they all sprang from the same sources. And same thing with Buddhism. And we can relate the Bodhi tree to the Essene tree of life. And again, in Tibet, the teachings are all very, very similar. The Pythagoreans and the Stoics in ancient Greece, same principles. These are the principles that were buried in the Western world because they empowered the individual and took power away from the church. They took power away from the controllers.
Right, and that's probably the most important thing to acknowledge is who is holding the power, who's holding all of your power, who's giving you your belief system, and what do they benefit from it?
And Edgar Casey talked about Jesus and the Essenes as well, and that was his take on it, was basically what we did, what we both have. Very, very different, very esoteric look on life. And here you see, and I'll give you guys all these links so you could pile through it if you feel so inspired. The Nazarene Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. And again, this is talking about who is he? Well, the teacher of righteousness.
He is. That's the vibration that I get when he's nearby. It's a very solid, profound vibration that I'm really having trouble putting my finger on. I just know that I like it. I trust it. It's solid. And it's something that I can really, really appreciate and enjoy.
Most definitely. So when I was first doing energy work, usually there was two beings I would have in my mind when I was working on people. And those two beings were Yeshua and Buddha. Because to me, they were both very, very heart-centered, had tons of compassion for others. So I wanted to cultivate that compassion in myself to send the proper energy into the person I was working on. And I had several instances where people saw like an overlay in me of Yeshua, or had a vision. And so I always felt, well, yeah, he's probably working with me in some way, shape, or form. But then also, before I would work on people, I would call forth the energies of a lot of different guides, as well as divine beings. I would call in the archangels, I would call in the devas, and I would call in Yeshua, as well as Buddha and Kuan Yin, and other benevolent beings to work with me and to help me to bring the right energy, be that channel, that conduit to help others heal. And so Cindy, had an experience that, well, we both kind of did about this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he came to us just actually this morning at the end of the bed and was emanating this really beautiful energy and putting forward basically that for this year moving forward, he's going to be pretty much a right-hand man when it comes to our healing and teaching people, how to find joy in their hearts and just how to love and how to heal.
Exactly. So, again, this is another beautiful divine being that's out there. And he wouldn't want us being divided by dogma. There's over 70,000 different branches of Christianity. The bottom line is it's all about love and compassion. That's what it is. We shouldn't argue over, how do you baptize exactly, or you're spreading inaccuracies or errants. Your ways are wrong, my ways are right. He would have none of that. As you said, his energy is very, very straightforward.
Yeah, it's very straightforward. It's very stable. It's very assuring, So as far as being, you could call him a teacher of righteousness. It just feels like he has that vibration and he knows and he understands. And what's beautiful about working with all these different guides, if I'm working with one guide and I'm not getting the right information for someone, you can call on another guide and they'll help. It's not like they have these little issues with each other. They just want to help.
Yeah, as I've said many times, Christ wouldn't be fighting with Buddha or Krishna or any of these benevolent beings. Not at all. They're on the same side. They're trying to enlighten humanity. And then we see in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, and it's talking about the masters, and that's what these beings are. These beings are masters that can go through different densities. Their vibrations take them up into the highest realms, but they choose to still send their light and their teachings and their knowledge down to us. So if you resonate the most with whatever system, go with it. Whether it's, again, Kuan Yin or Tara, or if it's Yeshua or whatever it is, it doesn't matter, because these guys aren't working against each other. They want us to get past all this. They want us to embrace love and compassion, because that's the thing that's going to get us into the higher realms.
Yes, it's very, very important to understand that they all work together too. And it's okay for us to have different belief systems and have, whatever works for you. Listen to your heart, listen to your soul.
So that makes me think of the biblical verse where many will come to him saying, Lord, Lord, I did this in your name and that in your name. And he's going to say, I never knew you. Mm-hmm. You thought you were doing good, but in reality, you weren't. You were creating the division, the separateness, which is not a part of what, he wants to have manifested. He wants us to get past our dogma and differences and start showing true compassion and lifting humanity up out of the darkness and into the light.
Yes, and it takes, each one of us as individuals cultivating that love and kindness and understanding and allowing for other people to have their own belief system, what works for them, and hold that compassion and even enjoyment, looking at someone in awe and admiring, well, what do they believe, and be curious about it.
Yeah, explore the beliefs, like I was saying. When you start looking deep in and get past what we've been given, start exploring the things that have been burned and basically purged It just like what's going on now, because knowledge is being just destroyed. As I shared with you, some of those healing books that now are like $800. That's just ridiculous because they don't want it out there. And so they're getting rid of them. They got rid of all the teachings back after, he was walking the earth that could show people empowerment on a personal level, that you really could have a personal relation, with Yeshua. And you don't need to go through any church. You don't need to have any dogma. And as we see with the Essenes, they rejected the whole temple structure. They rejected the power structure. They rejected the way of the world, which was, a way of darkness then as it is now.
It is. So, it's just something to look at and consider and ponder.
Thank you guys for being part of the family. And make sure you are subscribed, and thanks for your support on Ko-Fi and Patreon as we work to change this world as much as we possibly can in a beneficial way. In love and light, God bless.
Namaste.